Hello, this is Amirali Alibai. I'm the head of performing arts at the Aga Khan Museum. Welcome to At the Aga Khan Museum. And this month's episode is dedicated to Indigenous people, and the Indigenous people in particular of Canada. And of course, no matter where you are in the world, there are Indigenous cultures, Indigenous people to that land. And so this episode is focusing on Canada, but there are connections everywhere. We in Canada, the Aga Khan Museum, are on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Iroquois, Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and we're very grateful to be able to live and work on this land. We start off our episode this month with a performance by Clarke and Cris Derksen, who are two artists. Mo is Métis, Cris is Cree in heritage, and they performed at the museum in our exhibition called Sanctuary last year in 2020. And this is their performance in the Sanctuary exhibition from our gala. Please enjoy.
Good evening. Welcome to the Aga Khan Museum Lapis Digital Benefit. My name is Ali Hassan. I am so happy to be your host this evening. Very thrilled to hear how many of you are tuning in this evening from all over the world. We're going to start this evening with two performers who make their cultural history very much part of their performance. I'd like to introduce you now to Clarke and Cris Derksen.
Tansei, I'm Mo.
And I'm Cris.
And we're going to perform the song Refuge in Truth. And it was really inspired by the exhibit Sanctuary that I had the chance to visit for the first time yesterday. And really inspired by Nicholas Gallanin's work, as well as Marcos Ramirez Ere and Ai Weiwei. So it's looking at notions of displacement and of alienation and of being exiled from lands. As Indigenous people, this is an ongoing struggle that we face, and it's trying to piece together ways that memory can help us to reclaim that space of belonging and connection. So the lyrics in Cree, Nehiawewin, which is one of, I guess, our ancestral languages, E aspi moyak tapwe wenota mamawe pimati siwenochi. We're taking refuge in truth all together in life.
And we wrote this song inspired by this exhibit just for you today.
Inside me, there is truth, tapwewin, taking refuge. Inside me, there are circles, taking refuge. Inside me, there is shame, love, fear, taking refuge. Inside me, heartbeats built of blue spruce, tree rings rooted in legacies held deep beneath the broken, taking refuge. Inside me, your eyes forming hoops of light, resilient, courageous, walking the edge of incredible dreams, bearing witness to exiled land, poisoned streams, taking refuge. Inside me, melodic utterances of kukum song, seeping through cracks of kitchen table, ceremony held under draped sheets, woolen blankets insulate secrets, becoming prayers. estranged moments, not all our own. An inheritance fills the silence after the bomb goes off. In our hearts, on our radios, in our streets. Deafening voices we know but do not hear unless we care to take refuge. Inside me, your eyes look darker. From this screen, this space I see. To taste you, here, near me. Longing pulls sense from holy pockets. Your hand wrapped in mine. Memories take refuge in touch, in sweet, inside. Honey from fireweed, the beekeeper gathers at dawn. Morning dew still wet on the stem. Hem of coat closing in on the hum. Can we hold close the possibility of community woven, singing the silken threads of belonging into a luminous weave? Like bees, take refuge in the gift. In dirt, make our feet wet like seeds in the soil of real time, deep like the hollow of Earth's basin, lined with bones, ancient stones who carry water home, back to the source, bursting over bellies and full moon breasts, renewed in liquid memory, taking refuge in animate time, now time, inside me, you are there, somehow the weave of this thread, we bear the load, we care enough to carry, we carry together, so let us take refuge in knowing this is Sagitoin, Wagutoin, Pimatsuin. Easpi moya, Tepwe winota, Mamoe Pimatsuin, Ochi. Easpi moya, Tepwe winota, Mamoe Pimatsuin, Ochi.
Wow, I love that performance. I can watch it again and again. Extremely powerful. Thank you, Cris. Thank you, Mo. Our next piece is an excerpt from a talk given by one of Canada's most esteemed poets, George Elliot Clarke. In fact, he was the Parliamentary Poet Laureate for several years, and also a Poet Laureate in his home province as well. So he gave a talk that really addresses the huge diversity within Indigenous people across Canada, or Turtle Island, as it is often referred to by many people. So I'd like to share with you part of this lecture that was given by George Elliot Clarke. If you want to see the full lecture, it is available on our YouTube channel, but this excerpt will give you the gist of what Mr. Clarke had to say. Please enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for that hushed pause. My name is Sarah Beamborg. I'm the Senior Exhibitions Manager here at the Aga Khan Museum, and it gives me sincere pleasure to welcome you on this cloudy, sunny day. The Aga Khan Museum opened 3 years ago in September 2014, and during this time, we've presented 15 exhibitions highlighting everything from exquisite Mughal miniature paintings and the marvelous creatures found in medieval art from places all along the maritime and overland silk routes, to contemporary Arab artists exploring the shape-shifting politics and culture of the Middle East and North Africa, as well as ancient masterpieces and modern creations from the living history of Syria, among many others. With here, locating contemporary Canadian artists, we welcome our first showcase of Canadian art. This exhibition connects with the overall mission of the museum, which is dedicated to advancing the values of pluralism by connecting cultures through the universally accessible language of art. The 21 artists featured in here come from diverse backgrounds with many places, influences, and experiences, adding to their identity as Canadian. While the backgrounds of the artists are diverse, what connects all of them in their art practice is that they explore and question the complex identities and layered histories of people, places, and objects. It's fitting that we open this exhibition in a city as multicultural as Toronto, and in an institution as devoted to pluralism as the Aga Khan Museum. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to acknowledge this land on which the Aga Khan Museum sits, known as Takaranto. I'd also like to honor the stewardship, past, present, and future, of the Huron-Wendat, the Iroquois Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This acknowledgement is especially important to us today because here is the Aga Khan Museum's way of marking the 150th year of Canada's formation as a nation. With all our many identities, we acknowledge the people who first welcomed newcomers to Turtle Island. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, and one of the artists featured in the exhibition, George Elliot Clarke, the 4th Poet Laureate of Toronto and the 7th Parliamentary Poet Laureate. George is a revered wordsmith. He's a noted artist in song, drama, fiction, screenplays, essays, and poetry. He's now teaching African Canadian literature at the University of Toronto. Clarke has also taught at Duke, McGill, the University of British Columbia, and Harvard. He holds 8 honorary doctorates, plus appointments to the Order of Nova Scotia and the Order of Canada. His recognitions include the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Fellows Prize, the Governor-General's Award for Poetry, the National Magazine Gold Award for Poetry, the Premiul Poesis from Romania, the Dartmouth Book Award for Fiction, the Eric Hoffer Book Award for Poetry in the US, and the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Achievement Award. Clarke's work is the subject of Africadian Atlantic, Essays on George Elliot Clarke, edited by Joseph Pivato. May I take a brief second to be a tiny bit self-indulgent, but I discovered through this exhibition that George and I share a lovely common thread. My late father was one of George's undergraduate professors at the University of Waterloo, and we recently were able to share our happy memories of my dad in what felt like the most sincere and friendly Canadian way for 2 strangers to connect by email. May I now remind you to turn your cell phone to silent and that there is no photography or video during the lecture, and will you please join me in warmly welcoming George to the stage. I don't know if someone showed you that, but it's fairly straightforward. Forward and backwards.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Sarah for the wonderful welcome here to the Aga Khan Museum, and I want to congratulate the museum on holding this exhibit, which is our staging this exhibit, which recognizes connections amongst the Indigenous peoples of Canada and other cultures. And I'm very pleased to have a poem that is part of the exhibit, and a poem that speaks about my own mixed heritage, which may not be absolutely visible to you. And I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to perceive me as representing a whole series of different potential ethnicities. It's okay, because I can tell you that whenever I travel across this country and internationally, I'm often stopped and questioned about exactly who I am and exactly where I was born, because my particular complexion and hair and accent seem to suggest lots of possibilities to lots of border guards and lots of airport security folks as well, who are often surprised that I don't happen to know Arabic, or are surprised that I was born in Canada, and are surprised that I don't have a Jamaican accent, or are surprised that I don't speak Spanish, and so on. So I've had lots of experience trying to explain my presence on this planet and my particular mix of DNA to lots of folks over the years. And so as I edge into speaking about reconciling First Nations and Afro-Métis identity, I'll just share with you a number of the identities I have been accorded. I've been thought to be Chinese. I have been described as being Malaysian. I've been described as Turkish. I've been, of course, thought to be Cuban, African American, except that my accent isn't quite correct for the African American identity. Yeah, so there's been a whole range of these identities I've been given. What I'm almost never identified as being is First Nations. I'm almost never identified as being thought of as being part Native or as Métis. And in fact, the first time in my life that I was ever told that I was, in fact, Native or had some Native characteristics or was part Indigenous and so forth was when I was 39 years old, way back in 1999. A Native woman, a Métis woman in British Columbia, took one look at me and said, "You are part Native." I was so floored. I was so amazed. And she gave me a package of sweetgrass. And it sent shivers down my spine, and sent shivers down my spine today to be recognized as having a partial Indigenous identity. So I want to talk about that a little bit more, and then maybe in the question period I can share some of my scariest border crossing anecdotes with you, and so on. But maybe I'll do that right away, just to get it out of the way, and give you something to smile at, or perhaps shake your heads at, and so forth. This goes back to 2014, and I was in Scandinavia. I happened to have been in Finland. I was on my way back to the United States, to Boston, where I was at that point teaching at Harvard as a visiting professor. And so I had a flight itinerary that went from Helsinki to Stockholm, and then direct flight from Stockholm to Boston. And when I was changing aircraft in Stockholm, getting ready to leave one flight and board an American Airlines flight to get to Boston, I had to pass through security and the metal detector and so forth. And of course, as someone who travels a lot, I know what to pack and what not to pack. So no alarms were set off, but that didn't matter. 2 security guards still approached me and asked for my ID, my passport, which I produced for them. Then they started to basically kind of massage the passport and riffling the pages and tugging at the pages to see if it might come apart. But you know, it's an official Government of Canada passport, so it's not completely tacky. And they continued to fiddle with it just to see if there might be something wrong with it in some way, shape, or form. And then they kept asking me over and over, you were born in Canada? Yes, I was born in Canada. That's what the passport says. Are you sure you weren't born someplace else? My mom did not tell me I was born anywhere else but in Canada, and so on. Until finally, because they were not satisfied with either the passport or my truthful answers to their questions, they asked me if I had any other piece of ID that could establish for sure that I was actually Canadian. And I happened to have, completely by accident, my Ontario driver's license. So thank you, Province of Ontario. You saved the day. But that still, even that was not quite good enough for them, because then they wanted to know if I knew how to make a bomb. They wanted to know if I was carrying a bomb. They wanted to know if I could identify a bomb if I happened to be carrying one. Luckily, I was able to say no to these questions, except I did say that I've seen people with bombs in movies, so yeah, maybe I could identify a bomb in that way, given my exposure to them in popular culture. And I completely forgot, luckily for me, I completely forgot that a long time ago, 1975, for my grade 9 science project, I designed an atomic bomb. It's a good thing I didn't remember that at that particular moment. Anyway, they were finally, they had to give up, essentially. They were still kind of unsure about my identity, but they eventually had to give me back my passport and let me proceed. But before I left their purview, they asked me, was this too much? Did you really find this to be too much to deal with? I said, yes. You know, it really was. And you should get used to the fact that there are people who are brown in complexion who are also Canadian. I'm not going to be the last one that you ever encounter. So get used to that, folks in Stockholm. Anyway, sorry for that little anecdote, but here we go. Identity. I begin with a poem. Being pure song Métis, my charisma's ambiguous like dark wine that's rosé. And my tongue sports obscene mutterings, cusses, squawks and squiggles, ripples and raps, clear and superficial as ink, trenchant as prayer. The carnal, ungodly poet, that's me. Acid-bathed, not sugar-coated, an ecstatic monster, a jabbering chimp. Should I be as colorless but bloody as Whitehall, the White House, Versailles, and La Tour de Belém, and other slave capitals? I lark with crows, make Camelot a hell. I'm rooted in the Sargasso. My smile backstabs. I hurl Bibles at you like stones. In autumn 1978, I was 18, attending a youth multiculturalism conference in Halifax, when I first heard the term Indigenous used to refer to the historical black settler population of Nova Scotia, and that's where I'm from. On my mother's side, if we leave out my Indigenous connections, I'm 7th generation Canadian as a result of black Americans who fled to Nova Scotia during the War of 1812. And in fact, my maternal African-American ancestors arrived in Nova Scotia in 1813. So I just want to pause to say that for all the many people who ask me every now and then, where are you from? Where are you really from? If they happen to be Canadian, I can probably tell them I've been Canadian longer than they have, and longer than their grandparents were, and so on and so forth. But in any event, this is when I first heard this term, Indigenous. And if memory serves, it was my then mentor, the brilliant actor, gifted poet and playwright, and polemical journalist Walter Borden, who employed the term to distinguish those of us of long residency in Nova Scotia, in Canada, from more recent black arrivals, most from the Caribbean, and a smattering from the United States and from Africa. I probably first began to use the phrase myself, Indigenous black. For as I was beginning to voyage beyond Nova Scotia as a university student, I began to encounter brother and sister blacks from other parts of the African diaspora who would wonder, like many white folks, just who the hell was I anyway? And what strange black culture did I possess when bagpipes could make me weep, almost as sentimentally as any Motown hurtin' song? In identifying myself as an Indigenous Black Nova Scotian. I meant no disrespect to the real Indigenous people, the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia, nor was I out to erase their claim to original presence, to an absolute indigeneity. What I was trying to do, like Borden and like the Africadian activist Rocky Burnley Jones, was demarcate this small forgotten band of African, more or less Americans from other newer Black Canadians, because we were in fact different despite our allegiance to the rhetoric of Pan-Africanism. And before I go any further, I gotta mention the fact that today is Louis Riel Day, which is a day that's very important for anyone claiming any degree of Métis allegiance or connection and so forth. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, Louis Riel was the radical, seditious, against the state, a radical rebel leader of Métis and Indigenous people on the Great Plains, Saskatchewan, and of course Manitoba. Also, he's one of the fathers of Confederation, but as you know, because he rebelled against John A. Macdonald, who of course has been receiving lots of critique these days for having been a bit of a racist, maybe being very much a racist, to be really clear and precise about that. But because he rebelled and committed treason against the federal government, he was eventually hanged, and today is the anniversary of his execution, actually. So I want to represent or mention him. But our difference as Black Nova Scotians was, in fact, native. I use that word deliberately with a small n. Unlike the newer Black Canadians, we could not look back only one generation to some other native land where we were either the majority or could wield significant power. Nor could we appeal to any foreign embassy to intervene with the governments of Canada and Nova Scotia to address our concerns. We were not only renters in cities, we held land in impossible to farm districts that were practically reserves, from which we filed mornings to work as cheap labor in white homes and in white-controlled cities and towns. You may not know this, but I will share with you this fact. When Blacks arrived in Nova Scotia in numbers between 1760 and 1815, our ancestors were settled outside mainly white towns and villages, and of course in a part of Halifax that became known as Africville. In other words, from the very beginning of Black settlement in Nova Scotia, we were segregated. Our communities were strictly segregated, to the extent that in some places we were not allowed to own land. Our ancestors were not allowed to own land in some of the white towns and white villages in Nova Scotia. At the same time, if they happened to work in a town, a white town, they might be expected to leave that town by sundown. That was actually a law in the town of Digby, Nova Scotia that was on the books until 1967, the centennial year of Canada. If you were Black and you lived in and you worked in Digby, you had to be out of town by sundown. This is not the South, this is not Dixie, this is Nova Scotia, Canada. And it's not that long ago, I'm 57. So this is only 50 years ago that law was still on the books in the town of Digby. So some of these Caucasian settlements, as I was just mentioning, had these sunset laws that said you had to be out of town by sundown. The effect of these provisions, the segregated communities, the fact that you couldn't live in the white communities in some cases, the effect of these laws was to render African Nova Scotians, or to use my word, Africadians, a virtual squatter class, dependent on low-wage employment from racialist white bosses to survive on their hard-scrabble lots, about as sustaining nutritionally and economically as cemetery plots. And it's important to understand that this racially motivated economic marginalization was a product of official colonial Nova Scotian policy carried on into post-Confederation Nova Scotia and well into the 20th century, into the 1960s. So Africadians got landed, accorded land, given land, which no matter how barren or stony or swampy, allowed for a sense of community and of home ownership, even if it also meant that kinship ties and emotional ties to the land, plus dependence on nearby white employment, plus a lack of access to effective schooling meant that one wasn't going to probably want to leave or venture very far from the hood. In stark contrast to first-generation West Indian immigrants from the 1950s, especially, Africadians were considerably poor, proverbially illiterate, with few valued skills and little class mobility, except to jump on a train or bus and go to Montreal or Toronto, Hogtown, I should say. Maybe I should say the Six. Maybe I should say the Big Crab Apple, as opposed to the Big Apple, it's the Big Crab Apple, Toronto, Boston, or New York. So, except for relatively isolated Preston, which still has the largest all-black community in Canada. I want you to think about that for a moment. The largest all-black community in Canada, not segregated, but all-black, 5,000 people. That's just 10 miles or so outside the capital city of Halifax. It's still there. They got their own volunteer fire department, black fire department, for crying out loud. Of course, their own church and so on, and very strong community ties. And that's a community that goes all the way back to the 18th century. Preston, North Preston, and there's also East Preston, and so on. So except for relatively isolated Preston and its environs, the historical Black Nova Scotian community was essentially colored with a capital C, especially in the Annapolis Valley, on the South Shore, in the Northeast, and even in Halifax itself. Our blackness is really Métis. Our blackness in Nova Scotia is generally mixed. It's generally a whole bunch of colors and so on. And I want to describe them: brown and tan and copper and gold and yellow and indigo and ivory and blue and even white. No matter how much we align ourselves, Black Nova Scotians, culturally and politically, with the larger African diaspora, and even with our kissing cousins in America, we were and we remain a community apart. Scholars even recognize the existence of African Nova Scotian vernacular English, a version of African American vernacular English that is as distinct as the variant spoken in Liberia and in Sierra Leone. Because I felt as a writer and a scholar that Black Nova Scotian or African Nova Scotian or even Indigenous Black did not and do not answer to our specificity as a broken off branch of African America, landed and abandoned in coastal British North America, I invented the term Africadian to describe us, our essence and our being, and I dubbed our communities, our land base, Africadia. So Africadia basically means a place abounding in Africans. It's based on a Mi'kmaq word. Not everybody agrees with this. Not everybody agrees with my thinking about Black Nova Scotia and Africadia and so on. And one of the persons who disagrees with me is a scholar by the name of Paula Madden, who says that by trying to claim an Africadian identity and identify Black Nova Scotian or Africadian communities, I am making a claim against the Mi'kmaq people. I, she says, am making a claim against the land and territory of Mi'kmaqi. So from her perspective, folks who complain, for instance, about Africville must be ignorant and insolent in terms of complaining about the obliteration and destruction of that community, 1964, 1970, because after all, if there is no such thing as an Africadian, if there is no such thing as a historical Black Nova Scotian, if there is no such thing as being able to claim a landed identity with communities and property and homes and schools and a volunteer fire department going back centuries, if we cannot identify ourselves as being a unique, special culture amongst the African diaspora, then why should we complain about the destruction of Africville? Because Africville is one of our communities. How can we complain about it? Because Africville was sitting on Mi'kmaq land. So how can we complain about the destruction of Africville if we have no right to this identity that I am outlining for you right now? So these questions about identity are never innocent. They're never innocent. There's always a political and economic and often just put the two together, political, economic tension around any groups claiming of a particular identity, because someone else is going to feel that you're horning in on their territory, so to speak. And another complaint I have with Madden's thesis from 2009 is that she argues that the collaborations between Africans and indigenous people, or Afro-Abo, I will say, African, Aboriginal, Afro-Abo, are very awkward and don't make much sense. She charges that also that the phrase indigenous black means that black Nova Scotians are denying our connection to the African diaspora and denying African solidarity, that we're separating ourselves from immigrant blacks like herself, whose roots are not indigenous, but nevertheless represent a presence, a new presence.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. And again, if you want to see the full video of that lecture, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch the entire thing if you would like. I want to return back to Mo Clarke, the artist that we saw in the first clip performing with Cris Derksen. In this next excerpt from a performance we had here in a few years back with Mo, she came in and did a show called Incantations. And she worked with a group of artists based in Montreal from other cultures, including an Inuit singer and a Qanun player, a Syrian oud player. And so this kind of intercultural collaboration that Mo created really speaks to the fact that Indigenous culture continues to evolve and is influenced and can even collaborate with artists that have come from other parts of the world as settlers to Turtle Island. Please enjoy this excerpt from Incantations by Mo Clarke. Enjoy.
This is my flock, this I protect, hear my voice. I am the wind, the eternal storyteller. I lift the wings of history and my great generations listen. I am the wind, this story beats strong. It leads through you and me, it blades together bloodlines, it weaves our history. I am the wind. Grandmother land holds inside her breast tribes that nest upon her body round, tracking bison trails, following ancient crow and howling feathered rhythms with the river flow. And within that tribe, Miss Cardinal woman sits on sacred soil. With sinew arms and calloused hands, she beads a story into a sash. And as she sits, she rocks her song over an open flame that rises up and spirals through the teepee frame. I am the wind. Marianne Trudel, Nina Segalowitz, Didem Bassar sur Canoun, Bertil Chourabé sur percussion, Katia McDissy-Warren, oud.
I remember that show really well. It opened our season that year, and a very special performance with Mo Clarke and her ensemble, especially for the museum, Incantations. Next up are two videos, Both feature Jeremy Dutcher. Jeremy Dutcher is a Juno-winning, award-winning, internationally known artist who, is quite young and is early in his career. In fact, he recorded his first video called Mehcinut at the Aga Khan Museum, which we will end this episode with. But next up is kind of like a behind-the-scenes look at some of the work that he was doing with us just in 2020 before we shut down for the pandemic. Please enjoy these last two pieces, both featuring Jeremy Dutcher.
Please give a very warm welcome to Jeremy Dutcher and his band.
We've been here for the last week and just kind of trying out some new stuff, and I wanted this space, as was mentioned, to not be so much of a performance. I just wanted to get some friends together and show you how we play.
Gangbusters, you won like that one of the highest honors, the Polaris Prize. For your debut album. You have such a history with this museum. In the Aga Khan Museum, you shot your music video, Mehcinut, here. You were doing this research and work in progress session. So I'm wondering, why the Aga Khan and not, say, the ROM?
I think the fact that this is a museum showcasing Islamic art. They're celebrating Ghana Week out in the lobby, and then there's an Indigenous music residency happening in this auditorium. I think the ways that certain institutions engage with diverse communities makes us want to come in the door, And so I instantly felt really comfortable here. It's a space that puts us beside ourselves, and I think for me those kind of spaces are really sacred, and I want to spend time in them.
Your music video for Mehcinut, this is the first time the Aga Khan Museum opens its doors to an artist. How did you manage that?
It wasn't me knocking down the door, I have to say that. It was, I think for us, as we were looking for locations for this video, we needed something to reflect the grandiose nature of a table of Indigenous excellence. Yes. And this space just felt like it had everything. Museums have so often been that place of dead space and of objectifying our heritage. And I think the more that we can come in these spaces and reclaim them and say that, no, it's about life and it's about continuance. Thank you so much.
Wow. Well, Jeremy's someone that we expect to see a new material from as well. And I hope that as we return to having live shows again, that we have the chance to see him perform again live, because it's quite an experience. That's it for this episode. And we're going to take a break for the next couple of months and then return back in the fall. My name is Amirali Alibai. Remember you can visit our Museum Without Walls at agakhanmuseum.org, or you can find us on YouTube. And there's a lot of great material there for you to enjoy if you have the time and are able to connect to it. Please take care, be safe, and see you again soon.